Good morning, everyone. I think we have a total of 116 participants who have joined us already with at least 250 registrants as of last night. Thank you for joining us in the first of our Foreign Policy Forum for 2021, entitled Maintaining a Rules-Based Maritime Order. We wanted to focus on Indo-Pacific issues in our foreign policy forum. So we have plans of organizing a few more this year without realizing that there are things happening just outside the main islands of Luzon. And it fits what we have tracked to the years, the ADRi Institute, as we have looked at the regional security environment. We continue to track traditional regional security challenges. Of course, with the pandemic, you have to look into non-traditional security challenges and threats. But we continue to monitor what we call our evolving security environment. And part of that is what we call in the Institute, the so-called asymmetric power projection that we have noticed this past few years, especially when this government shifted their foreign policy to what they call independent foreign policy without realizing that they fall into the trap of what we call the gray zone or the hybrid warfare of China. We are always thankful for satellite pictures provided to us by our partner Similarity. Thank you, Liz, and she will be sharing the latest pictures, and of course our media who have registered also. We continue to appreciate their vigilance on this issue because they continue to go out of their way to monitor this. But we have raised this issue already at the start of this year when we saw the passage of the new Chinese Coast Guard law. And I even wrote about it, I remember February, where I argued that China has recently enacted an alarming law that authorizes the Chinese Coast Guard to demolish structures on features it claims and use weapons against foreign vessels that illegally enter its territory. And of course, I myself gets frustrated with our own government calls it still disputed territory because it's not disputed since our 2016 arbitral victory. While laws like this are nothing new, concerns revolve around how China may abuse the language of its domestically institutionalized and regulated law to justify the country's aggressive actions at sea. And if we would remember, maybe it was 2 weekends ago, when our own task force on West Philippine Sea shared pictures of Chinese Coast Guard vessels. And it made us proud of what our own Defense Secretary, Delfin Lorenzana, standing up and even issuing the statement of calling on the Chinese to stop encroaching into our sovereign territory and immediately recall these ships as they violate the Philippine maritime rights and territorial integrity, followed up with actions taken by our own Foreign Affairs Secretary, Secretary Locsin. But more importantly is to take note of the support that we have gotten from the international community, those who share values of a rule-based international system. A call by Secretary Blinken to our Secretary of Foreign Affairs, a call of U.S. Defense Secretary Austin to Secretary Lorenzana, or even the strong statement by the Ambassador of Japan and Ambassador Robinson of Australia. It shows that there is support as we protect our territory. And the Filipinos should realize that we are not alone in our fight to maintain the freedom of the seas and uphold a rule-based maritime order in the Indo-Pacific region. There are like-minded states that share democratic values with the Filipinos. And in this fight to secure the West Philippine Sea, the Philippine government must stop downplaying China's expansionist agenda and must remain steadfast in reasserting our sovereignty. The Philippines must leverage and strategize through multilateral alliances to protect our territorial integrity and our maritime rights. It reminds me of what the chairman of our institute, Albert Rosario, has been stating for years, because it's something that he worked with before he stepped down as Foreign Affairs Secretary. Joint patrol with the United States, joint patrol with like-minded countries to protect our maritime interests. So in behalf of our institute, in behalf of our chairman, I would like to welcome everyone, and I would like to introduce a keynote speaker. We're proud of our continuous advocacy. We're proud to be associated with this advocacy. So Justice Antonio Carpio will be sharing with us his thoughts as our keynote speaker. Justice Carpio.
Thank you, Dindo. A pleasant morning to everyone. I wish to thank the ADRi Institute for inviting me to give this address. The oceans and seas cover 71% of the surface of our planet. Our continents, archipelagos, and islands are connected by nautical highways that traverse the oceans and seas. Along these nautical highways pass 90% of traded goods in the world. The survival and progress of nations depend on the free and unimpeded passage along these nautical highways. The oceans and seas are also rich sources of food, and hundreds of millions of people will starve or will be malnourished without food from the oceans and seas. The oceans and seas are also rich in oil and gas and other emerging energy sources like methane hydrates. There are also other minerals that are abundant in the seabed of the oceans and seas. Obviously, a body of rules is required for the use of our oceans and seas, as well as for the exploitation and conservation of the resources in our oceans and seas. Such body of rules must be complied with by all nations of the world. Otherwise, without such body of rules or without compliance with such rules, nations will go to war to defend their right to use the oceans and seas and to exploit the resources of the oceans and seas. Fortunately, there is such a body of rules called the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. UNCLOS is one of the greatest achievements of man in developing international law. UNCLOS has codified customary international law that developed through the ages and has introduced novel concepts such as the exclusive economic zone and the International Seabed Authority, which regulates the resources in the seabed beyond national jurisdictions. The compulsory dispute mechanism of UNCLOS is one of the greatest advances in international law when UNCLOS was signed in 1982. Under UNCLOS, right is might. Unfortunately, in the South China Sea, the People's Republic of China has sought to overturn this right is might concept upside down by claiming almost the entire South China Sea in glaring violation of UNCLOS. China is enforcing its claim outside the compulsory dispute settlement mechanism of UNCLOS by authorizing its Coast Guard to fire on foreign vessels fishing in the high seas or in their own exclusive economic zones hundreds of nautical miles from China's own exclusive economic zone. China has adopted the concept of might is right in the South China Sea in violation not only of UNCLOS but also of the UN Charter. The nations of the world must unite to strongly push back China. Otherwise, if China succeeds in taking the South China Sea or in making the South China Sea its own national lake, denying the application of UNCLOS in the South China Sea, then UNCLOS will collapse for other naval powers will also seize their near seas as their own possessions. That will mean the demise of UNCLOS and the end of a rules-based maritime order. That will mean the beginning of a maritime order created and enforced by naval guns and the entrenchment of the might is right concept. That will mean a naval arms race among coastal states and the diversion of funds from social service to naval defense. That will mean perpetual tension and even chaos in the oceans and seas of the world. In this webinar, we will examine how we can maintain UNCLOS, the rules-based maritime order of the world in the South China Sea. The South China Sea is the battleground, whether UNCLOS can survive or fall in the seaside. I hope that the discussions this morning will make everyone realize how great the stakes are in this battle to maintain the existing rules-based maritime order in our world. Thank you and a good day to everyone.
Thank you, Justice Carpio. Your personal advocacy in protecting and preserving our territorial and maritime sovereignty, specifically in the West Philippine Sea, makes us so proud. Thank you for continuing this fight and advocacy, and thank you for your keynote speech. I'd like to turn over to our moderator, our young colleague, Dr. Robin Garcia, who will moderate for us and introduce the next speaker. He is a non-resident fellow of the ADR Institute. Robin?
Thank you, Professor Dindo. Good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank the ADRi for organizing this event and for inviting me as well. I'm very happy to be here. So today we have a diverse and very exciting set of speakers who will speak from the perspective of technology, law, international relations, and the military, especially in the context of the recent activities of China in the West Philippine Sea, specifically in the Whitsun Reef or the Julian Felipe Reef. So what we'll do is we'll ask each speaker to deliver their remarks about their specializations, and then we'll open the floor to questions and queries if there are any. Okay, so I think we can begin. So our first speaker is from the technology industry, who will talk about their activities in the South China Sea, particularly their contributions. So our first speaker is Ms. Liz Dare. She is the co-founder and CEO of Similarity. Liz has grown Similarity into an award-winning artificial intelligence software company that automatically analyzes multispectral and SAR satellite imagery, such as those of the South China Sea. And as I understand, they were really pivotal in for the Philippines knowing about the activities of China recently. So Similarity provides AI-driven insights for a variety of monitoring needs. Liz is a 30-year veteran of Silicon Valley. She's an award-winning entrepreneur and a software developer, and she has customers from the federal government in the United States, GIS consulting companies, as well as clients from the international defense and intelligence industries. Without further ado, I'm happy to welcome Ms. Liz Dare to the floor.
Thank you so much for that very warm welcome. I really appreciate it. I've noticed something in our 6+ months of observing the South China Sea, and I want to show it to you. This may not be the technological presentation you were expecting, but I want to show you what's going on. That's how we do our work here, and with the satellite imagery, and hopefully inspire you that there is a way to put a stop to the aggression that's happening. So can you all see my screen? Yes?
Yes.
Great. So I believe we need to safeguard the Philippine Eez and that is not happening. This satellite image here is a mosaic image of some of the Spratly Island features that are inside the Philippine EEZ, all of those in pink outlines, but are unoccupied. And you'll notice Mischief Reef down at the bottom that is occupied by China. So first, the Philippines EEZ. I don't want to go over things you already know, but an EEZ is where a coastal state can assume jurisdiction over the exploration and exploitation of the marine sources up to 200 nautical miles from the shore. Nations claim and exercise sovereign rights and exclusive fishery management authority over all fish in their EEZ. At least that's what the law says. But despite the 2016 ruling by UNCLOS and the many diplomatic objections that have been filed, foreign countries have occupied features in the Philippine EEZ without the Philippines' permission. They have wreaked ecological damage, destroyed reefs, and built artificial islands, turned those islands into military bases, prevented Philippine fisherfolk from accessing their rightful fishing grounds. They've overfished the Philippine EEZ, and they have even threatened Philippine citizens. In case you haven't seen the Philippine EEZ, the big purple line here is the west side of the Philippine EEZ that borders on the South China Sea. And all that stuff down on the bottom there are the Spratly Islands and who is occupying which one. And we're going to delve into that. Many of the Spratly Islands fall within the Philippine EEZ, but not all of them. We recently reported on the status of the Union Banks, which falls entirely within the Philippine EEZ, and the illegal constructions, illegal based on the sovereignty of the EEZ, by both China and Vietnam in Union Banks. And this was spurred on by the occupation of Whitsun Reef that happened recently. So up here in the big red oval is the Union Banks, and the Whitsun Reef is this boomerang shaped piece at the top, which you all have probably gotten familiar to seeing. And the red triangle actually indicates occupation by China. And I took that from Wikipedia, who says that China is essentially occupying Whitsun Reef because they patrol it regularly with their Coast Guard. And there are several other features that China is occupying by controlling and patrolling with their Coast Guard and preventing other people from accessing the features. It's a harsh reality, but I think we need to know that that's how the world sees this. So, defending the EEZ. Philippine citizens are calling for the government to protect their EEZ for a variety of reasons, but one of the major ones is their inability to feed their families due to the decreased fish stock and being barred by foreign governments from their traditional fishing grounds inside their own EEZ. The Philippine government has said that they don't want to risk a war with China by protecting their own EEZ. And that makes sense. China is very powerful, especially compared to the Philippines. However, if you're serious about protecting your sovereignty and your people, you need to actively monitor, patrol, and occupy the features in your EEZ. Now, this can be done very inexpensively. You can use Similarity's premium monitoring service. You've seen the free monitoring service, and we use a lot more data in the premium service. But you can also use inexpensive occupations, such as a lighthouse or a very small installation, a ship, which you all have actually used to occupy Second Thomas Reef. This, combined with increased Philippine Coast Guard presence and more frequent patrols, is a non-aggressive way of protecting the EEZ, and this can be done without provoking a war. Vietnam has protected its sovereign rights over its own EEZ by building 29 outposts in the Spratly Islands, not all within the Philippine EEZ. The Philippines has protected its sovereign rights over its own EEZ by building 11 outposts in the Spratly Islands, also not all of which are within the Philippine EEZ. The Philippines are occupying islands outside of the Philippine EEZ. But in rough numbers, Vietnam is building outposts 3-to-1 over the Philippines in terms of protecting their sovereign rights. Now, the Vietnamese outposts are not all islands. They've done far less island building than the Chinese. Many are expensive, what they call DK1 stations that require no island building. They don't disturb the ecology. They have helicopter pads on top for resupplying, and that means you don't need to create extensive ports for ships. They've managed to do all these things without provoking a war with China. There are many unoccupied features within the Philippine EEZ. They're basically sitting there for the taking. Here's a list of some of them. And these are just the ones that are actually nearly at the water level, sometimes potentially during low tide above the water level. They're not just these deep sunken features. There are a lot. In fact, there's more than that list. These lists together show all of the unoccupied features within the Philippine EEZ. So if the Philippines occupies the unoccupied Spratly features in its EEZ, with some research into prioritizing which to occupy first and what the best level of occupation is, their EEZ will be protected. This will stop foreign countries from occupying more Spratly features and building more destructive artificial reefs. It'll help protect Philippine fisherfolk and defend their right to fish in their own EEZ. Intrusion into Philippine occupied features will be considered an act of war, and the Philippines has relationships with other countries that will protect it if it is attacked. China is trying to gray zone their territorial expansion and have scrupulously avoided outright military conflict in the South China Sea. They do not want a war. So, occupying these features will help the Philippines defend against mischief reef. If we leave them out there for the taking with no monitoring, no regular patrols, and no occupation, they're open for anybody to go grab them and occupy them themselves. So here, the green stars indicate the Philippine occupied features. The red triangles indicate the Chinese occupation. And in this particular picture, all of the rest in the pink outlines are some of the unoccupied features that belong to the Philippines because they exist within their EEZ. Unfortunately, the Philippines is weak. At Similarity, we've seen and documented what the other claimants in the disputed territories have been doing to shore up their claims. We've seen how much weaker the Philippines is in protecting their territory compared to the other claimants. If this weakness continues, we will surely see more features being occupied by foreign countries. I read this article, Force Majeure, China's Coast Guard Law in Context by AMTI, and this chart really struck me. If you're curious about the Philippines' weakness, if you look, the Philippines are the only countries in this list that are not authorized when facing imminent danger to the Coast Guard assets' lives or the lives of others. there is no blanket authorization. There is no blanket authorization against vessels attempting to flee or resisting arrest. And it's not clear whether they're authorized to defend sovereignty or sovereign rights. You can see many of these other nations are authorized to do this defense. So in summary, Singularity has been analyzing satellite images of the contested areas of the South China Sea for more than 6 months. Our unbiased, well-documented reports have been picked up by news media all over the world. We aim to shine a light on what is actually happening in a timely manner so that countries can take appropriate actions to prevent more complicated disputes. I believe that getting the foreign countries to surrender the artificial islands they have already built in the Philippine Eez is unlikely. And so the Philippines should focus its efforts on making sure no more are taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz, for that presentation. Definitely, technology is an integral component to monitoring and really forming strategy and foreign policy approaches in this time of very, very important situation as we try to respond to what's happening in the Middle East. Thank you very much. So the next speaker will talk about an equally important development, and that's the China's Coast Guard law. So let me introduce Dr. Chester Cabalza. He's the president and founder of the International Development and Security Cooperation. Dr. Chester Cabalza formerly was the vice president of the Center for Research and Strategic Studies at the Development Academy of the Philippines, and was an associate professor at the National Defense College of the Philippines. He teaches in the Graduate School of the University of the Philippines in Diliman, and he's also concurrently a fellow at the National Defense University in Beijing, or used to be a fellow, National Defense University in Beijing, and the United States Department of State. So, Dr. Chester.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robin Garcia, for your kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Stratbase ADRi for inviting me on this foreign policy forum. I am very happy to be part of this discussion. Like what Dr. Robin mentioned, I will be discussing about the Chinese Coast Guard law and its implications to world order and regional security, given the current escalation of conflict in the West Philippine Sea, and what should be our policy responses to China's growing military actions in our maritime domain. In 10 minutes, I would like to answer these questions that I have posted in my presentation. First is why China wants to become a great maritime power by using its Navy, Coast Guard, Maritime Militia, Merchant Marine, shipbuilding, and fishing industries. And how is China's Coast Guard law impacted the world order and plausible scenarios when China demands for the use of force on its three biggest armada? That's the second question. And lastly, what can the Philippines do to counter China's self-vested maritime ambition? I think this is not new to all of us that China really wanted to become a leading maritime power in the region and in the near future in the world. But what are the indicators and pieces of evidence why China wanted so much? For China, maritime power equates to having a robust and strong navy. It has now the largest and effective Coast Guard. It has a world-class merchant marine and fishing fleet, owning a globally recognized shipbuilding capacity. These maritime capabilities are used to achieve food security by harvesting and extracting marine resources, especially fish, in the West Philippine Sea. That kind of centrality and control in using containment would characterize this China dream as a leading maritime power in defense of its maritime sovereignty rights, and interests. But the overlapping territorial claims in the contested South China Sea remains a vulnerable flashpoint area where rules on the use of force are conflicting, inauspicious, and lacking. China's strategic circumstances have changed dramatically over the past 20 years, that their long-standing sovereignty issues on unification and gaining control of land features in East and South China Sea demands a focus on Xi Jinping's China dream of a maritime power, and that is a necessity for his credible national leadership. And in a few years, China will have the world's second most capable navy, but there are reports now stating that China has the most number of naval vessels but still lacks naval strategy and battle experience. It is already a world leader in shipbuilding, as I mentioned earlier. The world's largest fishing industry with its merchant marine ranks top 1 in terms of total number of ships owned by citizens. It has already the world's largest Coast Guard vessels and maritime militia, which we saw recently in the Whitsun Reef and around the West Philippine Sea. And China's 3 greatest armada are its Navy, Coast Guard, and the maritime militia. Now, given this kind of scenario, where China aspires to be the top maritime power, what are the grand naval plans of Beijing to succeed? Now, the fear factor that Beijing's camouflaged China Coast Guard reintroduced to the regional security complex after a heated argument or enactment of the China Coast Guard law last February 1 brought some silver linings in the lethal use of force of white ships. The xenophobic attitude of China's larger Coast Guard vessels simultaneously guarantees its flex muscle on foreign vessels entering Chinese maritime jurisdiction. Beijing's constant rational strategy can be felt since the 1995 occupation of the Mischief Reef. These calculated maritime and coastal arrangements undoubtedly elevated Beijing's unprecedented naval strategy on commanding this position by the great power in the current epoch of Asian century. China's kung fu style in warfare and finesse wolf warrior diplomacy could enlarge a knockout bout to the opponent. It leads to Beijing's perfection of using a sophisticated diplomatic sway and economic stimulus that exceptionally undermines Manila's own fickle Game of Thrones and episodic strategic culture that paves a way for more advantageous score to Beijing's successive interests. Now, as tensions escalated, China timely recalibrated its action and tone. The Philippines in panic as it examines its strategic calculus to respond to China's gray zone campaign in the South China Sea. And China's increasing military posts reflect inclusive mastery on the execution of the perfected gray zone strategy behooved in the militarization of occupied features and the modernization of the People's Liberation Army. It fortifies the behavior of China's 3 warfares overarching behind the shadows of hardened artificial islands while consolidating maritime forces strongly to achieve defensible strategic support-based facilities by increased and sustained naval presence. In similar circumstances, China has repeatedly transgressed international laws and conventions despite the Philippines' diplomatic acquiescence to Beijing. It rebuked the growing friendship in the 2019 reed bank ramming of fishing vessels, making Filipino fishermen abhor Chinese military militia's non-observance of the 1979 International Convention for Safety of Life at Sea and the 1982 UNCLOS on Maritime Safety and Security. Despite massive maneuver and power projection of its second and largest armada, the People's Liberation Army Navy and Coast Guard, China recently ushered its strategic ambiguity in the Whitsun Reef. While the Philippines considers the reef to be part of its exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, the informal Chinese incursion on March 21 and last week's chasing of civilian boat carrying Filipino media by 2 fast-track craft of China's Coast Guard vessels can be alleged by Manila as a prelude to China's pragmatic alternatives to escalate a full-scale conventional conflict that leads to certain aggressiveness, legal insecurity, political propaganda, and extensive calibration of episodic conflicts by employing coercive means. Now, even if China has completed the amalgamation of laws to strengthen its Coast Guard, the world is watching on how China will utilize its lethal use of force, which is like a time bomb ready to explode anytime. But the world will not allow China to use that force from its white ships. China's successive salami slicing attack on March 30 can be recalled when it echoed in Chinese radio operations over the Philippine Air Force's aerial sovereignty patrols in the chain of contested islands of Whitsun Reef, Caliron Reef, Mischief Reef, and Johnson Reef. from a rigid yet achievable Great Wall at sea and Great Iron Wall in the blue sky, China is pressing it hard to solidify all its claimed territories and domains based from its ancient terrestrial and territorial glorification born from the Great Wall of China's superlatives, and expanding its lordship over the 5G technology and the Internet of Things through the Great Firewall, that even when you reach Palawan, you will receive a message of welcome to China. The People's Liberation Army Navy is still dwarfed by American and European navies combined in terms of number and strength. The reason why we see robust aggression in the West Philippine Sea because China wants to rectify its shortcomings in terms of muscle flexing in China's Coast Guard, Maritime Militia, and the fishing industry. Now, though China will not stop in its maritime expansion and military aggression in the South China Sea, diplomatic protests and noises against its strategic deception, use of force, illegitimacy will hound the narratives of the next generation of Chinese people. These narratives of resistance will form part of another 100 years of humiliation for China. A whole of alliance approach is important to pressure China to align its behavior on a rules-based maritime order. A whole of alliance will stop China from exercising its unrestricted warfare and gray zone strategy. A whole of alliance is stronger in terms of naval strength, maritime law enforcement's implementation of international laws into achieving a stable and peaceful Indo-Pacific region. China should abide for a symmetrical and equal fight and to set aside its biased, greedy, and humiliating military actions in the South China Sea if it wants to be respected as a global leader. For the Philippines, it must enact a national territorial defense framework in post-2022. What could be thought of for the Philippines to achieve a robust strategic culture was further complicated by the lack of overarching and comprehensive mechanisms offered by the National Security Policy, National Security Strategy, National Defense Strategy, and National Military Strategy that would integrate all the instruments of national power of the Philippines to produce tangible results in terms of improving its territorial defense posture through armed forces and maritime law enforcement agencies mandated to safeguard the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The China threat carries a duality of a boon or bane resourcefulness for the exhaustive Philippine national security in protecting a dangled sovereignty and territorial defense operations. Manila's dependence on the evolving policy and security environment has led to its past policies conceivable as more reactive and limited in scope that lack ingenious long-term objectives with neither effective nor substantive gains being achieved. Lastly, we must commend our Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, and Air Force for showing their fearless commitment to safeguard our sovereignty and territorial integrity. Let's learn from our mistakes from the past and continue to fight for what is ours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chester, for your remarks about China's international behavior and how might that affect the Philippines and what the Philippines can do moving forward, not just in the short term, but also in the long term. Thank you very much. Now, to extend the analysis on China's Coast Guard, we're happy to introduce the next speaker, who is the director of the UP Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea. His career spans a diverse field from marine policy research, international maritime boundary negotiations, high seas fisheries, and the like. He has also assisted the Philippines in pursuing its claim to a continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles in the Benham Rice region, and is listed as one of the UNESCO IOC experts for special arbitration under UNCLOS Annex 8. So without further ado, I'm happy and proud to introduce Dr. Jay Batumbakal, an expert in maritime law.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for inviting me to this conference. I'll try to be brief since we do have a lot of speakers lined up. Let me just share my screen and the presentation. Now, I have been requested to give a brief talk about the implications of the new China Coast Guard law on international norms and national policies. And is my slide moving? Has it changed? Okay. So
Yes.
this is an overview of what I'll discuss. It's only a very brief discussion about the China Coast Guard China Coast Guard's activities in the West Philippine Sea to set the stage for our discussion of the problematic provisions of the new CCG law. Before we quickly conclude. Now, since 2014, the activities of the China Coast Guard have been quite prominent in the news media. Okay? It was created, after all, in the middle of 2013. And so the ships became very, very visible, very prominent in its operations in the West Philippine Sea. Looking through the news reports since that time, we'll notice that the China Coast Guard has actually been undertaking various operations and actions against Philippine ships and fishermen, which could be seen as their attempt to undertake law enforcement within the West Philippine Sea. These range from 2 to 6 reported incidents since 2014. But we have to note that some of these incidents are only an indication of actually a larger number of incidents, particularly in 2018. Okay? In all, the reported incidents that I have been able to record or note already number 29. And that means more than 29 instances of the China Coast Guard attempting to carry out law enforcement even before the enactment of the new China Coast Guard law. The types of encounters or actions that the CCG had taken are quite varied. We've seen rather excessive actions, such as the use of water cannon against Filipino fishermen on board their small bangkas, the ramming of the bangka, leading in a couple of instances to possibly serious damage because their outriggers were torn away. The confiscation of fishing gear and fish catch from even the smallest fishermen or fishing vessel, and the intimidation of our fishermen by the China Coast Guard using small boats, small rubber boats and dinghies on which rode armed men, men with long rifles. We've seen them also interfere with the navigation of Philippine vessels, not just fishermen, but even government vessels. The most common tactic being to cut across the bow, or present or create a possible collision situation. And in other cases, outright dangerous maneuvering, especially before the arbitration award was handed down in 2016. That, however, did not prevent subsequent interference with navigation through measures such as shadowing and approaching the smaller vessels using their large Coast Guard cutters. And most importantly, we've also seen the China Coast Guard apparently protecting the activities of Chinese fishermen, even if such activities were destructive fishing activities. And there is ample record of this taking place in Scarborough Shoal. These activities, of course, are only indicative of a larger regional presence using the largest Coast Guard ships that the world probably has ever seen. And they're all of various classes operating within the South China Sea, not just the West Philippine Sea. And on the right side, you see a map produced by the CSIS AMTI, also showing the number of days present that they were present in 1 year. And this number of days at sea really represent continuing presence that is necessary for them to establish de facto occupation or de facto control and administration of these particular areas. And this is taking place not only in the West Philippine Sea, but also in other countries' EEZs, such as those of Malaysia and Vietnam. We've also noticed through the study of movements and patterns of movement of these China Coast Guard vessels, some regularity in their activities. For example, in Scarborough Shoal, there are more or less 2 to 4 Chinese Coast Guard vessels always on station. They relieve each other constantly, regularly. And in a Ayungin Shoal or around the Ayungin Shoal, there's at least one China Coast Guard ship always on patrol. And in other areas of the Calayan Island Group, particularly in the big three islands, the B3 islands that I call them, these are the large military bases that they have been able to set up on Subi, Mischief, and Fiery Cross. There is a constant arrival and departure of these China Coast Guard vessels, as well as those of the Chinese Navy and Maritime Militia and all their other fishing vessels. Okay. Obviously, those islands really have been used as offshore supply bases and bases of operation or forward operating bases so that they can establish a continuous presence anywhere in the South China Sea. The patrol routes have also changed. In the earlier years, we've seen China Coast Guard vessels proceeding to the specific locations within the South China Sea directly from their bases in either Hainan or Hong Kong. But lately, they have established longer range and long endurance patrols that typically would proceed from a base in Hainan, proceeding to the southern parts of the South China Sea, and then curving around, and swinging by their installations. Always these long-range patrol routes would have a stopover in any one of the big three islands before proceeding to the other locations in the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea. And they make it a point to regularly pass by Ayungin Shoal and Scarborough Shoal, aside from being present in the inner parts of the Calayan Island Group. And this, all of this really substantiates their attempt to effectively occupy, or de facto administer and control the South China Sea. And that enables them coverage of the entire area of the South China Sea, even within the 9-dash line that they have been claiming to demonstrate or illustrate the extent of their jurisdiction or sovereignty over the area. Now, this sets the stage for our understanding of the China Coast Guard Law, which is officially titled the Maritime Police Law of the People's Republic of China. This was enacted in January 22, just very recently, and was effective only last February. It is composed of 11 chapters and 84 articles. And maritime police is the term that they use to refer to the China Coast Guard. This may be significant because it seems to impart the impression, give the impression that this is a purely domestic agency. Article 3 of the CCG law is the most problematic because it describes the area of application. And here, what it says is that it will apply to the sea areas under the jurisdiction of the People's Republic of China. The problem here is that sea areas under the jurisdiction of the PRC, as originally defined in the draft of the law, was indicated to refer not only to internal waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, EEZ, and continental shelf, which are recognized in UNCLOS, but also, in addition, other sea areas under the jurisdiction of the PRC. So, what other areas could they be aside from what is already defined in UNCLOS? This was originally contained in Article 74, Paragraph 2 of the draft law, but was deleted from the law as passed. However, we must remember that China established the city of Sansha, and the description of the territory and jurisdiction of Sansha city essentially covers the area of the 9-dash line, and particularly identifies the 4 island groups, including 1 imaginary island group, in the South China Sea. So we can see that the potential of this CCG law to be applied in this area is rather significant. Okay? It is intended to reach beyond China, beyond China's own waters under UNCLOS, and into the exclusive economic zones of other states around the South China Sea, contrary to UNCLOS and the South China Sea Arbitration Court. Article 17 deals with sanctions against what it refers to as illegal entry into their territorial waters and internal waters. The thing is that other than or aside from giving the authority to order these supposedly illegally entering vessels to leave immediately, it also expressly allows them to take measures such as detention, forced removal, and or forced towing. The thing here is that illegal entry indicates that there is a justification on the part of China to deny the right of innocent passage through the territorial waters, through the territorial sea under UNCLOS, no, as provided for in Article 17 to 19. So it is inconsistent with the spirit of those articles. Furthermore, the additional measures to be taken, detention, forced removal, and forced towing, those are not recognized in UNCLOS as valid measures for the territorial sea, even in cases where the vessel is not carrying out innocent passage. Okay? So what is provided for in UNCLOS is only the right to order them to leave immediately, and the flag state of the offending vessel is bound to comply with such orders. This represents a threat to all non-Chinese ships in areas that China considers to be its territorial sea or internal waters. And the problem here is that this is not only limited to China's coastal waters. We've seen through their laws that they consider, for example, the waters between the paracels to be internal waters because they established straight baselines around them. And we've already seen them demonstrate this actually in Scarborough Shoal when Filipino fishermen were rammed or water cannoned because they were inside the lagoon of the reef of Scarborough Shoal. Article 20 speaks of the authority to demolish any structures within the sea areas under China's jurisdiction. And what is problematic here is that this establishes a basis for or authority for the use of force against smaller Southeast Asian states' numerous structures and installations and activities in the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea. The employment of such force against smaller Southeast Asian states' possessions within the alleged jurisdiction of Sancha City would be contrary to the UN Charter, particularly Article 2.4, which prohibits the use of force. It is therefore a threat. For us, it is a threat to the Philippines' structures and outposts in the Calayan Island Group. Article 21, on the other hand, speaks of foreign military and government ships, and the CCG law gives the China Coast Guard the right to take measures such as forced eviction. This is contrary to the principle of sovereign immunity, which is enshrined in UNCLOS. Government ships are entitled to sovereign immunity under Article 30 to 31. And even if they are in the territorial sea of another state, and even if they have acted in a way that the coastal state considers to be a violation, what UNCLOS allows is only that they be required to leave immediately. And if they do not, that flag state, the flag state of the offending vessel will bear international responsibility. Sovereign immune ships also have freedom of navigation beyond the territorial sea. So this authorization under Article 21 is actually a threat to Philippine government vessels, whether they're the Philippine Navy, including the BRP Sierra Madre on Ayungin Shoal, the Philippine Coast Guard, the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, and even our marine scientific research vessels. And this has already been implicitly demonstrated in the warnings that they have been giving our Philippine ships and aircraft operating in the Calayan Island Group. Article 22, furthermore, provides for a general authority to use force. And under this article, the China Coast Guard is allowed to use all necessary measures, including weapons, to stop the infringement and to eliminate the danger. The problem is that this is an open-ended and arbitrary standard with a very low threshold, any infringement that they see to be taking place. And this already authorizes the use of force in the name of maritime law enforcement. International jurisprudence establishes very high standards, including the exhaustion of means of communication, clear warnings that must be received, and restraint in the use of force only to what is reasonable, absolutely necessary, proportional, with a duty to minimize damage or injury. These standards are not recognized in this article. And instead, it is, as I said, open-ended and arbitrary. This clearly is a threat to all non-Chinese vessels, and we have seen the China Coast Guard demonstrate how we can use these types of force against Philippine fishing vessels in Scarborough Shoal and KIG. It's only fortunate that no one has died yet. Article 25, furthermore, allows the China Coast Guard to establish maritime security zones from which the passage of ships or even the presence of ships and personnel other than China excluded. This allows the establishment of exclusion zones and restricted areas at sea without limitation, no? Unlike in UNCLOS, which permits only the suspension of innocent passage in the territorial sea and internal waters. This apparently can be applied anywhere in the South China Sea within the jurisdiction that China claims. This also represents a threat to all non-Chinese vessels seeking passage through unannounced exclusion zones, and we've seen this happen already in many instances, especially last week, no, when we saw it being apparently underlying the or being the reason why the China Coast Guard gave chase to a Philippine fishing vessel approaching Ayungin Shoal. And lastly, this is very interesting, Article 75 allows the China Coast Guard to independently carry out retaliatory measures, no, against what it sees as discriminatory prohibitions, restrictions, and other special measures, citizens, legal persons, and other organizations in maritime law. This authorizes an independent retaliation and reprisal by the China Coast Guard per se against foreign citizens or organizations for whatever reason. So in conclusion, the enactment of the China Coast Guard law may be within the prerogative of China for the most part, but its application clearly must be limited only to its own legitimate areas of jurisdiction under UNCLOS. However, China has already demonstrated that it is capable of, or it has undertaken, excessive exercises and illegitimate extensions of jurisdiction. These are facts, not speculation. We already have prior experience showing that their practice exceeds such areas, exceeds the legitimate areas, and they directly challenge Philippine jurisdiction over its own EEZ. The implementation of the China Coast Guard law cannot be used to assert China's excessive claims to jurisdiction in the South China Sea. Certain authorities granted by the CCG law further are in excess of what is currently recognized in UNCLOS, such as particularly the express authorization for the unilateral use of force beyond what is provided in the convention. And it also lays the basis for the use of force contrary to the UN Charter, especially if applied against sovereign immune vessels of other states, against Southeast Asian claimant states in the South China Sea. And this underlies, or this emphasizes even more why it is important to consider last week's incident where we saw integrated operations between the China Coast Guard and the PLA Navy. They are continuing assertions of Chinese claims in the West Philippine Sea, contrary to UNCLOS and the South China Sea arbitration, and they must never be accepted as normal or legal in any manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. J. Batumbakal, for that nuanced and historical survey of the activities of the Chinese Coast Guard. We'd also like to thank Dr. Batumbakal for the close legal analysis of the CCG law itself. Now to move on to the next speaker. From the perspective of the military, we'd like to call on Rear Admiral Rommel Ong, who will talk about the freedom of the seas, strategic issues for the Philippine defense posture. Rear Admiral Ong served in the military for 32 years and retired as the Vice Commander of the Philippine Navy. Upon retirement, Admiral Ong took on the role of the Executive Director of the Security Reform Initiative, an independent think tank that advocates for the adoption of policies, programs, reforms, and agenda in support of the country's human and national security well-being. He's also a professor of praxis at the Ateneo School of Government. Rear Admiral Ong, your comments, please.
Thank you, Dr. Robin. I will just be reading my presentation. There's no PowerPoint slide. Last week, we were confronted with two incidents. The presence of more than 200 Chinese fishing vessels who form part of their militia anchored off the Julian Felipe Reef, and the incident involving a Type 22 missile boat chasing one of our media personalities aboard the Filipino vessel. Both incidents occurred well within our exclusive economic zone. Both incidents exemplified the use of the Navy, the Coast Guard, the militia, and fixed facilities, and how these capabilities are employed in synergy to support China's strategic ambition to establish sea control in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. So the gray zone tactic of China actually is subsumed under a higher consideration, which is sea control strategy. So where does our Philippine defense posture stand now? Unfortunately, it's still in limbo, as it was in the last 5 years, a victim of the government's independent foreign policy, and aggravated by weak institutions and state actors that succumb to a very transactional policy environment. The strategic issues for the military's defense posture and regional security environment are as follows. Given the pandemic, we need to look at the impact on the defense posture from the following aspects: the armed forces of the Philippines' force readiness and budget, the delay on the modernization program rollout, particularly the game changer package. And looking at the West Philippine Sea alone, we need to rationalize the modernization programs, both of the AFP and the Philippine Coast Guard, and a security posture to address our maritime security issues in a resource-constrained environment. We need also to look at the impact of Chinese influence operations on policymaking and the official narrative of the government, which has crept even to some extent even in the armed forces of the Philippines. But more disconcerting is the potential for political interference later on in 2022 with the end view of solidifying a pro-China policy regime in government. The president's pro-China policy is a failure if premised on a quid pro quo for economic benefits at the expense of security interests. But we still need to engage China. The challenge is how to decouple from the current engagements that are disadvantageous to the country's interests, craft an appropriate diplomatic posture that veers away from the servile and defeatist narrative espoused by the government. Mitigating the effects on the Philippine-US alliance, given the president's transactional approach, particularly on the BFA, and reassessing how to shape the alliance in a post-Duterte period. And lastly, we need to work with the rest of ASEAN in defining its role in regional stability. While we are an ally of the US, we still need to find a countervailing mechanism to keep in check the US-China strategic competition from destabilizing Southeast Asia. Perhaps ASEAN can be the key to this. In closing, how do we deal with these strategic issues? First, while it is unfortunate that we have the pandemic to deal with, and it might have derailed the modernization program, but if there is an opportunity to negotiate favorable terms with the Indian government, we should push through with the acquisition of the BrahMos anti-ship missile system. With this capability, we neutralize the impact of the PLA Navy operating within our EEZ. Second, as we try to restore a Philippine-US alliance in a post-Duterte scenario, let us also expand our strategic partnerships to other countries. France is one option. It has an express policy towards enforcing the international order in the South China Sea. France has also expressed intention to help the Philippine Navy in following an ongoing negotiation for acquisition of a submarine capability. And lastly, third, let's push for a proactive ASEAN through the ARF Plus and the ADMM Plus. One way of mitigating the US-China strategic competition from dominating the geopolitics of our region is by establishing a multipolar order in Southeast Asia, hopefully through ASEAN. This ends my presentation. Thank you and good day.
Thank you, Rear Admiral Ong. Thank you for the comments on how we can strengthen our national security in various ways. Before we open the Q&A, we'd like to call on the last, but not the least speaker, who will talk about a time of political uncertainty and zero in on the gray zone tactics of China in the Indo-Pacific. So we'd like to call on Dr. Renato De Castro, who is a full professor in the International Studies Department of DLSU In 2016, he was chosen as a US-ASEAN Fulbright Initiative researcher from the Philippines, and he was based at the East-West Center in Washington. He is an alumnus of the Daniel NUA Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies in Hawaii. His primary research interests include Philippine-US security relations, Philippine defense and foreign policy, as well as US defense and foreign policy in East Asia. So please welcome Dr. Renato De Castro.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I would like to express my utmost appreciation for the Albert de Rosario Institute for International and Strategic Studies for giving me the opportunity to present my paper or my thoughts regarding this. My task is basically to provide the big picture, to look at China's gray zone operation, which is of course out there. It's a reality that we're facing right now as we're having this webinar. At the same time, also look at how our country would be able to address this. Of course, this is a more challenging part because this is classic David and Goliath scenario. How can we basically address, this point I was raising, China's surging second sea force. It's linked basically to how China looks at power, which is based on the notion of qi. Qi is often equated with water. Water has this powerful surge. So we're talking in terms of not just one surge, but 3 surges of water. Let me just discuss what do we mean by gray zone operation. I'll just breeze through this as much as possible. I also want to finish this presentation as soon as possible. So they're primarily political warfare, meaning, of course, it's below the threshold of the actual use of force of the military capability. Directed at producing political result, that part warfare that imposes political needs, meaning, of course, as much as possible, you don't use the military capability by firing a shot or firing a missile. You can use it to intimidate, but not to actual use of violence. And of course, the political goal is to win the engagement without any actual battlefield campaign or battlefield engagements or campaigns. Of course, we have seen this type of warfare, especially when we look at what happened during the Cold War, gray zone propaganda, subversion, special operation. Gray zone operations are considered as measures that apply the persuasive or coercive force of power to force adjustment, not dramatic adjustment, incremental adjustment in terms of military, economic, political, and cultural relations with other states short of, again, of actual use of war. This would, of course, primarily weakening the political will of the other state by attacking a strategy or, of course, creating cleavages within alliances. Gray zone operation, of course, blurred the lines separating the military and the military platform actions, attribution for coercive action directed or undertaken to pursue specific political goals ranging, of course, from a basic, what's happening, what we're seeing right now, of course, is changing the territorial arrangement in the South China Sea. And of course, even to the point of undermining a current state of affairs, aim, of course, of creating a sphere of influence. So let's look at the particular nature of China's gray zone operation. So my presentation will be looking at China's gray zone operation, the tools used, how we have been at the receiving end of Chinese gray zone operation, and how could we basically address this David and Goliath scenario. Of course, China right now is engaged in a protracted competition, not only with the Philippines or the other littoral states in Southeast Asia or even Japan. It's engaged in a strategic competition with the United States. And the issue here is not simply a matter of the South China Sea or what's happening in what we call the first island chain. It basically involves the rules of the thumb of how the system, the rules-based international system, would operate way into the 21st century. And of course, from the Chinese perspective, this is a matter of evolving. It's based, of course, on the traditional Chinese approach to statecraft and warfare from the art of war, Sun Tzu. A notion, of course, of qi, the momentum of any situation at a given point in time, on how the balance or correlation of balance of forces will be on the side of China. In this game, China's strategy sees the competition as primarily, as much as possible, psychological and political. to change what you call the operational or in a psychological milieu rather than outward use of force. As much as possible, then this has been raised by the other speakers. Measures beyond, measures short of actual war. And of course, this is the goal of China as articulated in the Art of War. This is basically Chinese game plan. To win without actually fighting. China should seek victory not in a decisive conflict, which as possible should be avoided, especially in the light, of course, that at this point in time, the United States still has the strategic advantage in terms, of course, of the quality of the United States Navy vis-a-vis, of course, the emerging Chinese People's Liberation Army's navies, to gradually improve its diplomatic strategic position, of course, between the United States and its ally. Now let's look at the term I would be using. Surging second, third sea forces. What do we mean by this? Of course, China has already implemented a hardline policy depending on terms of its periphery, which it sees its core interests. Incidentally, of course, this began under the reign of President Xi Jinping, who's now basically, of course, the president for life. China has put particular interest in securing and expanding its maritime rights and interests in terms of territorial sovereignty and economic interests. This, of course, involves preparing the People's Liberation Army's Navy into an effective joint force that can respond to the maritime challenge, of course, primarily against the United States. And I've heard this from a number of my conversations with the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and when they had this talk with their Chinese counterparts would often tell them, don't worry about these islands. This is not directed against you. This is, of course, directed against the United States. So the long-term goal, of course, is to engage the United States in joint campaign in what it perceives as its near sea, or a term that has become very popular right now in Washington, D.C., the term first island chain, which we can, discuss here. Of course, has roadmap activities of the plan, and not only the plan, of course, and this is something that Jay has extensively discussed, and Chester, the Maritime Law Enforcement Agency. I will not discuss it. I will discuss the third component. And of course, it enabled China to apply pressure in countries without the use of force, in which has disputes, maritime resources, and like promoting, of course, the securement, of course, expansion of Chinese maritime rights based on the 9-dash line. Of course, surrounding Spencer Sea, let's discuss, of course. So what do we basically mean by the first, second, and third sea forces? Number one, of course, when we talk of the first surge, we're talking about the Gray Hull, the People's Liberation Army's Navy. That, of course, incidentally, is currently claiming a huge part of the defense budget of the whole. Whereas before, we have seen the People's Liberation Army as primarily a land-based continental force. Now you have, of course, the People's Liberation Army's Navy getting more resources. And primarily because this reflects China's strategic ambition, maritime expansion. And this, of course, is an area that has been discussed by Jay and Chester. The Coast Guard is, of course, controlled by the People's Armed Police. I'm sorry about the typo error, which is the paramilitary wing of the Chinese Communist Party. So we see, of course, the Leninist structure here. And of course, the plan is supposed to be the professional. Then you have the Coast Guard and the People's Armed Police as what we consider as the arm of the party. This reminds me, of course, of the Commissars, or in the case, if you look at Nazi Germany, the SS, stormtroopers, which is attached to the Nazi party. And of course, the focus right now is, of course, the Maritime Militia. This is just, of course, the Coast Guard, but the Maritime Militia. This is the full name of the Chinese Maritime Militia, People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia. It is a separate organization from the plan, from the Coast Guard, and of course, consists of ordinary citizens working on the marine economy. This, in a way, reflects China's, this is a term that was used, of course, when we often look at warfare by the People's Republic of China, People's War, during the Chinese Revolution, where you have, of course, a whole nation approach. So what do we basically, when we look at the militia? Militias receive training from the plan and the Coast Guard to perform tasks including but not limited to border patrol, surveillance, reconnaissance, maritime transportation, search and rescue, and of course, auxiliary tasks in supporting both the Coast Guard and the Navy. Of course, China has denied its existence because it's not an organization similar to the Coast Guard nor to the Navy. There's no single maritime militia organization in China. In a way, Chinese embassy or the Chinese foreign ministry is correct. There's no militia because there's no organization. What you have, of course, is constellation of forces among local and provincial government that support the national defense effort of maritime expansion. But nevertheless, you have the direction. At the national level, the militia policies are prescribed by the Central Military Commission under, of course, President Xi Jinping himself. However, the various militias are under local and provincial leadership. So the PAM is made up of two components. Number one, the ordinary fishing cooperatives that are part of the FAM operate as commercial fishing ventures. Ordinary fishermen had undergo training and of course has this radio. You remember during the Scarborough Shoal, the Chinese fishing vessels in Scarborough Shoal were able to contact a number of Chinese law enforcement maritime vessels. In a matter of 8 hours, they were there blocking the BRP Gregorio del Pilar. So, but the more professional ones, that's what they call the blue hulls. And if you notice, the hulls of the ship in Holian Pilipi Shoal are all blue hulls. They, of course, indicate that they're part of the more professional, better equipped for direct action missions operating as maritime vanguard of naval auxiliary to enforce maritime rights, assertions, instead of commercial. They're there, of course, to support the plan and the Coast Guard. Remember the sinking of a Filipino fishing vessel where the crew members were abandoned at sea? The suspicion, of course, was it's conducted by this branch of the militia, the professional, that also conducts reconnaissance, scientific research. Broadly seen, these two general types of militias are considered the FAM and operate as what is called the surging Third Sea Force, along with the plan. And of course, let's just breeze through this. The existence of China's second and third sea forces yielded China's with a formidable second navy, aside from the plan. Chinese fleet boasts not only of the world's largest navy in terms of number, not necessarily in quality, but also the world's largest maritime law enforcement and of course, militia fleets, which is simply overwhelming. You'll be overwhelmed by their presence. A major contribution of China's second navy is advanced Chinese sovereignty claim in the realm of gray zone, where they could deny its existence, where it denied that it's actually directed by from the military commission. It operates within the gray zone between war and peace as they afford China's increasing clout and influence over regional maritime situation without, of course, the provocative presence of the plan's gray ships. Okay, but we cannot separate the gray ships from the second fleet. They're interconnected. China's second navy demonstrates a form of naval power that reduces the risk of escalation, while at the same time, the plan focuses on more important naval missions. Of course, war fighting, power projection, in terms of war fighting capability to prevent US intervention, just in case you have a conflict in Taiwan, or of course, dealing with the Japan's maritime defense force. That's of course, even against the Philippine Navy and other navies in ASEAN, that will be, of course, handled with the People's Liberation Army. This is just our experiences. I'll just breeze through this. We have been at the receiving end of China's gray zone operations. Just basically look back. Of course, the first time we experienced this was occupation of Mischief Reef, discovery by Filipino fishing vessels, not by the Philippine Navy or the Air Force, of Chinese wooden huts. I still remember this. In 1995, there were just wooden huts when they were discovered. Philippine Air Force reconnaissance planes confirmed the existence of Chinese structure on the reef. Reconnaissance flight also revealed the presence. Of course, this triggered a crisis. In 1995, in the presence of other ASEAN countries, the Philippines signed a bilateral code of conduct with China aimed at preventing similar incidents occurring in the future. This was during the time of the Ramos administration. This was the time that after certain hesitation, the Philippine government decided to sign the Visiting Forces Agreement in 1994, eventually, of course, concurred to by the Philippine Congress in 1999. And of course, the expectation was there will be increasing Philippine-China bilateral cooperation in the South Chinese. Of course, everyone knows this did not happen. Circa 2012, stand-up began in April 2010 when the Philippine Navy ship Gregorio del Pilar tried to arrest more than 10 Chinese fishing vessels that were spotted in fishing in Scarborough Shoal. Immediately, of course, you have 2 Chinese maritime surveillance vessels arrived and prevented the Philippine Navy from arresting the Chinese fishermen. The 2 Chinese civilian ships then boldly informed the captain of the Navy ship that this is Chinese territorial waters. You have strayed into Chinese territorial waters. China immediately, of course, gained the upper hand when it forced the Philippine Navy service combatant to withdraw from the shoal. And of course, the Philippine government instead deployed a single Coast Guard vessel. But then China deployed an armada of armed civilian vessels at their disposal. And of course, China put the burden on the Philippines on either we escalate or we withdraw from the shoal. Then eventually, China sent a number of additional patrol. Consequently, 3 huge imposing Chinese civilian vessels confronted the lone Philippine Coast Guard vessel in the shoal. Then, of course, circa 2021, Secretary Lorenzana announced the presence, announced increased sovereignty patrols, which is, of course, within the Icton. Then, of course, he made a very strong statement. The evening, the Department of Foreign Affairs filed a case. In a way, we see, I would use the term, a vigorous, animated reaction, at least from the level of the Defense and Foreign Affairs Secretary. The President is still nowhere to be found. Well, probably we don't know where. He had taken note that, of course, the government has taken note, has incrementally asserted its expansive claim in the South China Sea by building artificial islands, so forth and so on. Made possible because of, again, the swarming the South China Sea with both the 2 fleets, public civilian vessel, effectively defying overwhelming littoral states' efforts to drive them. The objective, of course, accomplished by overwhelming presence and what had to unable to do through diplomacy enabled power, a possibility. Now, let me just go to how do we address this? Of course, this is easier said than done. We really have to think on how to deal with it. I think the starting point is psychological, on how our leaders and how our people would have to view the issue. We must understand and be very wary that China's policy to the Philippines, in particular to others, will be guided by this dictum. Chinese leaders believe that their country has a preponderance of economic and military power to alter the rules and norms and institutions that govern the world and to suit their country's interests. That, of course, China is a power that's bent on challenging the United States as the foremost power here, of course, specifically here in the region, not necessarily all over the world. The essence of political and military warfare from China consists of primarily either words or deeds, but of intention. China's intention is to win without actually fighting, to force us to withdraw from Julian Pilife Shoal, engage China in a bilateral negotiation, which would, of course, lead to simple subjugation, that we will have to accept China's maritime expansion into the South China Sea as a fait accompli, as a facts on the ground, both in terms of our leaders and, of course, as a nation. But we have to understand what will be the consequences of this. Victory should be measured through successful, of course, but instead for China to win without actually fighting. So how do we? It's a gray zone operation. China is following the game of go rather than chess. It's the West win by not eliminating or launching a full-scale military invasion of the Philippines or engaging the Philippine Navy in a decisive battle, but to strategically achieve dominance, survival, and prosperity, and to convince us, to convince our leaders and our people, it's futile to resist China. We have simply no choice but to accept China's maritime expansion, and of course, the fact that we will have China as our closest neighbor because they have control. So what should be our goal if we decide, the people would decide to, of course, the people would like to resist. Its problem, of course, is the current administration. Philippine goal is to prevent China to win without actually fighting. This requires application of subtle, indirect, and less threatening visible countermeasure that must prevent China from achieving this goal, to win without actually fighting. This will require the Philippines applying asymmetric warfare from adopting the strategic principle of water, which China is also adopting. Water has no constant shape. Water is flowing. It's formless, adapts to the terrain. The ability to gain victory is to adapt to one's opponent. So the most basic, of course, is to prevent China from winning without actually fighting by, at least at this point in time, deploying the Coast Guard, which of course has been strengthened by the provision of Japan of 12 Coast Guard vessels, but unfortunately has not been deployed in the West Philippine Sea. Then Admiral Ong also mentioned the fact that we have acquired assets not only from Japan, but from France. And of course, instead of deploying them in prime tourist spot like Boracay, they should be deployed not as a military, means, not as a provocative, but to show that we won't allow China to win without actually fighting. Of course, we should also develop a credible defense force by focusing our limited national resources on building the Navy and, of course, the Air Force. Acquisition of capabilities like what Admiral Ong mentioned, an intermediate range missiles that could provide us an anti-access area denial capability against the Chinese Navy. Both armed services supported by the Army should train for asymmetrical warfare against bigger and more powerful threat. But of course, it doesn't end there. We have to revitalize our strategic alliance with the United States. Of course, since 2016, there have been doubt in Washington, D.C., whether the Philippines is a reliable ally. Hopefully, we could resolve this matter after next year's election. If we will have an administration that, of course, will be conscious of the national interest to stand up against China's gray zone operation, not to simply accept the fact that we have no choice but to submit, to be subjugated by China. Then, of course, the importance of strategic partnership with Australia, Vietnam, and even possibly Taiwan. Make our people realize that appeasement is not the only option. There are other options. The strategy should still be based on avoiding war through limited deterrence, and of course, importance of alliance and security partnership. We should move strategically to achieve relative power vis-a-vis China, relative power, not overall, because there's no way that we could have a parity with China. This would require a goal of national mobilization based on a whole nation approach. I think when Admiral Davidson delivered a talk last week, he said even the U.S. approach in this strategic competition with China will be a whole nation approach. China is also applying a whole nation approach. Aim at achieving the goals of national survival and, of course, resilience amidst a ongoing great power competition. I think I end my presentation here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. De Castro. Thank you for elaborating on China's gray zone tactics, which seems to be a really important part of China's strategy in the maritime domain. Thank you as well for mentioning some ideas for how to move forward. I like particularly your mention about the cognitive or psychological components of national security for our policymakers. Now, thank you to all the speakers for delivering your remarks. At this point, we'd like to open the floor to question and answer. There are actually a lot of questions already, and we're very excited to get down to it. So maybe I could begin reading out some of the questions. So for Ms. Liz there, there's a question about how the Philippines can integrate geospatial artificial intelligence technology in its maritime security strategy in response to what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. Can it be a long-term solution to the gaps in monitoring and assessing the disputed waters?
Absolutely, it can be. And we keep adding more data, more and more satellites get launched every day. And the capabilities are only getting better. And my hope is that they will also get more affordable. Unfortunately, satellite data is pretty darn expensive. We've been able to do a lot with free sources of data. The European Space Agency, you see a lot of their images in our reports. We get those for free. And we are looking at offering various tiers of monitoring that include more and more data, more and more accuracy. I think that it is totally a viable long-term option. And I think it's just going to keep getting better. So we can start small if that's what the budget allows for, but we've got a lot of room to grow and a lot of data that can really help.
Right. Liz, are you familiar with any Southeast Asian countries or any country in the region who's already using this type of technology in the maritime domain?
I believe that nearly all of them use AIS technology to track ships. That's pretty standard, and that does come from satellites. And I don't know of anybody using it regularly, like combining the AIS data with the SAR radar data to see through the clouds, and optical data and radio frequency data, which is what we're working on doing to be able to track not just the ships that are reporting their location, but the ships that aren't. I don't know of anybody doing it, but that certainly doesn't mean they're not. That the governments don't necessarily tell me what they're doing.
Right. Thank you for that. There's a question about, is there any reason why we currently don't have a national territorial defense framework? I'm not sure who this question is from, but it's directed towards Dr. Cabalza. If you have any comments regarding why we don't have national security or national territorial defense framework, that would be
right. It took time for us to have that kind of. It's only this is the context basically from 2000 to 2011. The Philippines Armed Forces relied only to Defense Planning Guidance, or DPG. So, in other words, our strategy in our external defense is very AFP-centric or military-centric. And then, until such a time, thinkers in security thought of having this national defense strategy, national military strategy, and then national security policy and national security strategy. It only completed until last year. So, meaning to say, the national territorial defense framework is just like a harmonization of all these instruments that would help the Philippines in attaining a secured sovereignty. And basically, we hope that the next president will have this kind of policy. And despite the flip-flopping foreign policy that we have right now in this current administration.
Thanks, Chester. So can you maybe mention more about what you mean about an AFP-centric strategy?
Right.
And because you also mentioned earlier a whole of alliance approach.
Right.
Perhaps you can elaborate on that, and maybe
Okay,
we'll take on Dr. De Castro also.
Yes. In our history in combating our external insecurities with China and basically in the South China Sea, the Philippines has relied so much on the principles and concepts of military tactics and strategies. That's the reason why a lot of our thinkers and scholars at the time thought that the solution to solving the problem with our external defense would be a military solution. But it did not take effect. It was not effective actually. That's the reason why we thought of the whole of government approach, the whole of nation approach. Those are some of the borrowed concepts that we thought of in trying to solve this dilemma, conundrum in the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. And we also thought that after completing all these different kinds of strategies, namely national military strategy to defense strategy to national policy and national security strategy, still we have a problem, a big problem and gaps in solving our conundrum issues in the West Philippine Sea. So the call for this whole of alliance approach is for the Philippines to ask or seek assistance from its treaty allies like the US and some other Western powers. Last night, there was a full coverage of the Department of Defense arguments in the States where they discuss about this whole of alliance, and they have some recommendations on how to of course, they have some suggestions on how to resolve the issue with China, and of course, their policy in the South China Sea. And I think this is something that the Philippines should also look forward to, because basically we cannot defy China right now because of its strength, military strength, and the only thing to do that is to have that whole of alliance approach. And despite that, having these strategies, I think that we need help from other countries also.
Right. Thank you,
Uh,
Dr. De Castro.
Yeah, I think the term that Chester is looking at is not just territorial. This is a term used, developed in the 1930s by an American academic, Carl Mead Earl, the notion of grand strategy. That everything would be focused, of course, on the fact that the international system has changed, that we have to prepare for exigencies, that all efforts, education, industry, economy, even infrastructure had to be linked with national security and national defense. And it's based on the fact that the system, the international system, or the region from which we are part of has changed. And this has something to do not just simply because of the South China Sea. This is because of China's emergence as a great power and how China has been behaving as a great power in the 21st century. So the basic essence of grand strategy is based on the Roman dictum, old Roman dictum. If you want peace, prepare for war.
Is it safe to say, Dr. De Castro, that the Philippines does not yet have a grand strategy, or we haven't really formed the grand strategy? And do you advise that we form a grand
Chester mentioned
strategy?
about alliance. We're so confused. We don't know the meaning of alliance. For one thing, alliance is a two-way street. We expect assistance from the United States, yet we have our political leaders talking about independent foreign policy. We cannot have independent foreign policy as long as we have alliances. We cannot have a situation where there's no enemy, no friends, because we have an alliance. Alliance is a two-way street. The enemy of our ally is our enemy. If our enemy asks for assistance, we cannot say we're neutral, we won't get involved. So we don't even know what this alliance is. So that's my point, right?
Correct. So how does this idea of alliance play out with forming our grand strategy? I'm sure grand strategies are not just about alliances.
Yeah. You link alliance, of course, with arms buildup. You link alliance with you try to strengthen your alliance. You have alliance management. You also ensure your alliance is vibrant and make sure that you're more friendly to your ally than with your enemy. Right? Right?
So
right?
maybe
last year we see the president so active because the visa of his friend was canceled by the United States. Now we hardly see him. Does this reflect a disconnect in terms of our alliance politics or our foreign policy, if we have one?
Right. So as part of alliance management, Dr. De Castro, you mentioned, how do you view this whole alliance with the United States, especially in the context of this Whitsun Reef, Julian Felipe Reef incursion?
Maybe we can ask other speakers like Admiral Ong and Jay. Can we ask Admiral Ong and Jay?
We're Admiral Ong, from the perspective of the Navy. Do you have anything to add? Or
Jay?
Yes? Or Dr. Jay?
Maybe Jay first.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I didn't catch the last part of the question about Whitsun Reef or Julian Felipe Reef. How is it faring?
I think the question is about how we should approach our allies, especially the United States, of course, one of our most important allies.
Okay. Well, number one, as Rene said, alliance is a two-way street. It's not about just having somebody else do the work for you, which seems to be the most common misconception, no? That somebody else should fight your battles for you. That is preposterous and rather juvenile, I think. No, alliance relations is about working together on mutual interest on issues of common concern. It does not mean that you will always have the same interest, but well, there will be areas where you will not be able to cooperate. You will have divergent interests, but that is not what the alliance is for. The alliance is for areas of mutual interest where your interests converge. Here in the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea, there is a convergence of interests between the Philippines and the United States. No, that is with respect to the freedom of navigation, essentially the mobility of ships and aircraft through the South China Sea. The US is carrying out or trying to protect its interests through its freedom of navigation operations as well as through its alliances. Sana, the problem is the Philippines is not being so cooperative lately. The Philippines actually also has an interest in maintaining that freedom of navigation, that mobility through the South China Sea, because that is the only way it will be able to maintain its sovereignty over the small islands in the middle of the West Philippine Sea and South China Sea. In both cases, against these two, China's interest is to deny that freedom by taking control, exercising exclusive sovereignty or jurisdiction, including against mobility, maritime mobility in the South China Sea. So you see that that is what we should be looking at, no? Not whether or not the United States should go to war for us, while we don't even want to protect our own interests. No? So here, what's happening now at what Julian Felipe Reef, I think we've seen that in this case, you have a gray zone operation being undertaken, no, through this maritime militia. And the proper response has been undertaken by the Philippines, which is the diplomatic interaction, no, the protests. And they have had an effect because they did disperse from Julian Felipe Reef. No? That is the attributable to the noise, shall we say, the diplomatic noise or the attention that was called by that diplomatic interaction. Now, they did disperse from Whitsun Reef, but of course they distributed themselves all across the other islands of the Calayan Island Group, no? At islands, reefs, and rocks of the Calayan Island Group. So that shows you that it is not the only step that should be taken. There should be continuous diplomatic activity to try to keep moving these vessels out of the Philippine EEZ. Okay, so there, in order to do that, you need diplomatic leverage, you need political support, no, of the international community, particularly of your allies. No? And that's why the alliance relationship still is very important. No? And we've seen, no, that this in this particular instance, the immediate statement of support from the US, Japan, and other like-minded countries really provided that leverage, no, which led China to try to resolve the problem quickly by dispersing its fleet. No? Now, granted, that is a short-term solution, that is a short-term outcome, but we should not forget, no, that lesson. No? Hindi po totoo na wala tayong magagawa. It's not true that there is nothing we can do. We can do it. We just need to imagine and plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. J. Rear Admiral Ong, do you agree with the comments of Dr. J? And perhaps what we can do?
Dr. J has said, I think he covers most of it. Most important na sinabi niya is we should not rely on the United States to do the work for us. We have to be able to prepare and work on our own. Okay. Thank you.
Correct. So maybe we could go back to China. There's a question from Jarius Bondok regarding whether the Philippines should treat China's maritime militia and Coast Guard as combatants because but the US and Vietnam is already considering that as these two entities as combatants. Anyone? Does anyone want to comment on that?
Well, I can just react probably. I know that the United States considers the maritime militia. They've classified them as auxiliary ships or auxiliary vessels, which under the laws of war, in case of an armed conflict, they are going to be legitimate targets. That is the effect of what the question implies, to consider them as combatants. But then that only will kick in if there is an actual armed conflict, an actual incident. Prior to that incident, the approach should be to consider these maritime militia vessels as agents of the government, agents of the Chinese state, so that any actions they take will be attributable to the Chinese government and not be, they cannot deny them as simply being the actions of some private party or private or one of their citizens, not attributable to the state. That should not be allowed, if that is the position that is taken. And I think here in the Philippines, given the statement of the DFA, April 2019, if I'm not mistaken, April 4, the DFA already indicated that if the maritime militia vessels continue their actions and the Chinese government does not withdraw them, they will be, the DFA in the Philippines considers those maritime militia vessels as acting on behalf of the Chinese government, regardless of their being fishing vessels.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. There's a lot of confusion about whether these are state-sponsored incursions or maybe these are just activities of non-state actors. And I think that's where China also claims that it's not really a state-sanctioned activity. So thank you for that. Rear Admiral Ong, did you want to add anything?
If you declare them as combatants, then those ships, like all warships, now become extension of the sovereignty of the country to which the ship belongs to. That is the nature of warships. So I don't think declaring them as combatants would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
In trying to mitigate the impact on the issues in the South China Sea. In fact, it may benefit the Chinese more than place them at a disadvantage.
Right. Chester?
Yeah, basically the reason why China is trying to intensify and basically strengthen its three armadas, namely the Navy, Coast Guard, and the militia, because basically they wanted to achieve the maritime power trim. And basically, since they know that its Navy cannot achieve yet the prime spot because the US is still the top naval power right now. They're using their militia and definitely the Coast Guard. That's why they are trying to strengthen and intensifying the strength of these two armadas.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a question about what the administrative remedy could be when our fishermen are attacked or harassed in our EEZ. I know that we've been launching diplomatic protests, but maybe are there other perspectives that we could, or actions that we could sort of employ from the legal perspective? Maybe Dr. J, this is towards you.
Yes, yes. Actually, I answered it by I typed in the answer, but briefly, since these fishers are civilian or private persons, then the government, whenever these incidents happen, the government should make diplomatic representations and undertake what is called diplomatic protection of our citizens. This means not only making a protest, filing protest, but also demanding through negotiations that the flag state of that offending vessel undertake an investigation of the vessel and its crew, impose sanctions against that that vessel and its crew, and secure compensation for any damages incurred by our citizens. And this will need to be the subject of negotiations in the course of normal diplomatic relations. I think in the case of the GEMVER, now there are indications that that was undertaken quietly, because the last news that we had was that they were already expecting compensation to be sent to the fishermen. I don't know if that has happened, but maybe that's something that can be followed up. If so, though, then that is the administrative remedy. Okay.
Correct. Thank you for that. Does anyone want to add? Okay. There's a question about the economic costs of Chinese incursions. I think this is directed towards all panelists, particularly on poaching maritime resources, Maybe we could elaborate on how this has affected Filipino fishermen and what we can do about it more than just the occupation of the islands, perhaps, is the question. Anyone? Chester?
Well, the economic cost has something to do with the Chinese diet, because basically they need fish. And given that, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, China's merchant marine and fishing fleets are the largest in the world, and that's the reason why they need that also. And it's the #1 shipbuilding right now, and they need that for their employment. So basically, on the economic aspect of it, as part of its maritime dream, definitely they need all these kinds of capabilities to achieve that kind of dream.
Right, right.
I don't
Anyone want
have-
to? Liz?
I don't have numbers. I wish I did, but I do know that the overfishing that is being done, for example, taking all the giant clams from Scarborough Shoal, that destroys the reef. It destroys the fish that live and depend on the reef there with the clams, and prevents it's irresponsible and not sustainable. It prevents more clams from growing, right? So you've got all of these aspects where the reef environment is getting destroyed. That hurts the fish. The too many fish are getting taken. The overfishing means there's going to be fewer fish having babies and fewer fish available to fish for, that used to be. I don't know how to calculate the cost of all this, but there's so much damage being done. And I think if you look at the fisher folk who are not able to catch the fish that they used to be able to catch and have to find some other way to feed their families, I've read anecdotal stories about this. That would be one way to put the price tag on it.
Definitely. And I think several senators have, Filipino senators have pointed out that China might have to pay damages. I'm not sure what exactly is the legal sort of track that we could use for that, but definitely the environmental component of all of these things matter a lot, and not just the actual occupation of the islands and the perceived bullying. So maybe we can move on. All panelists can answer this, and I think this is a more generic question about how do we push forward with a stronger and calibrated defense posture, given what's happening in the Philippine bureaucracy, how hard it is to sort of create a unified policy towards China. Maybe we could get some updates on what's happening with the Foreign Affairs Department or the Defense Department, and the like, maybe even the economic components, maybe side of the bureaucracy. So how do we respond to all of this, given the realities of Philippine bureaucracy?
Can I answer it?
Yes,
Yeah,
Dr.
so this is where you have the whole nation approach. This is not anymore the task of the defense or foreign ministry or economic. This is where you have to rely on your National Security Council. In the case of the United States, you have a National Security Council that has been created out of legislation, the 1947 National Security Act. We have a National Security Council here, but it's not created by legislation. It's created by an executive order. So this is where you have, of course, a whole nation approach. If you have a powerful, institutionalized National Security Council, we don't have it at this point in time. So you're talking about bureaucracy. My answer has to do with the bureaucracy. You have to rely on it. Yes.
Dr. De Castro, I wonder why you mentioned National Security Council, because it's a coordinating sort of
Yeah, so
body.
supposed to formulate the national security policy and the national security strategy. At least in this administration, for the first time, our National Security Council has come out with a national security strategy. So we have to give credit to this administration and to its national security advisor. So it's a matter of having it institutionalized and having it read and understood by people in government. And of course, also sharing it to the whole nation
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Rear Admiral Ong or Dr. Chester, did you want to mention?
I have three recommendations, policy recommendations for this. One is to continue with our AFP modernization process. I think we are still in the second phase of our modernization process that will end by 2028, meaning to say that at least we have a respected, credible deterrence posture at the time once we achieve it. Secondly, maybe let's continue with that national defense, territorial defense framework where we are going to harmonize all the different strategies that was concocted and proposed by different thinkers from different administrations. So I think that is the best time for us to have a very good guidance on how to protect our sovereignty in post-2022. And lastly, the call for whole of alliance. There was a torrid discussion earlier about alliance, and I think we should inculcate this whole of alliance in our system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chester.
Well-
Dr. J?
Yes, I'd just like to answer to the question earlier about the economic value. I'll just share a screen, of course, because this is, I mean, statistics and economics is really rather difficult and not really my field, but I'm showing to you on screen a graph, showing to you the catch data from the South China Sea, and you see there the catch in terms of value of the different countries, and the Philippines is right here, the light green part of this chart. Oh, sorry, it's the red one. No, they changed the color since the last time I saw it. And you can see it compared to China at the bottom, blue, and other countries like Vietnam. What you will notice really is that with respect to the Philippines, our production has been rather stagnant. No, it's almost the same across since the 2000s here. No, while the others have been fluctuating and increasing. No, but there's a clear upward trend when it comes to China and Vietnam. And now, overall, in the South China Sea, it's actually been a plateau since the late 1990s. No? If you go to this site, which is the seaaroundus.org, you can then click on each one of these colors. It will give you the detailed data that you need about values. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. J, for that additional data. I think Rear Admiral Ong did want to say something about our defense posture. Admiral Ong?
Well, we need to rethink our defense posture, particularly the impact of the pandemic in terms of budget. The Horizon 2, Horizon 3 modernization program might not be feasible anymore, considering our trillions of loans to address the pandemic. We need to maybe push back some of those in the list on the list of equipment to be bought, and focus on what we call the game changer package. Those that will have an immediate strategic effect on the South China Sea scenario. And of course, that would be basically coming from the Air Force and the Navy in terms of equipage.
Thank you, Rear Admiral Ong. I think it was also mentioned by Chester earlier about modernization and the idea of budget. Also, I just want to tie this together and maybe talk about what we think of defense spending. I know that it's below 1%, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and we sort of want to increase it to 2% or maybe even more to have a fighting chance to maybe project our power also in the South China Sea. Does anyone want to talk about budget and modernization, specifically how much we allocate as a percentage of the GDP?
I guess it's so. Go ahead, please. I guess it's a 1.4% from our GDP.
Okay.
But of course, based from our constitution, we should more put premium to education than on defense, because that is given in our supreme law. But for me, regardless of the budget, I think the most important is the strategy and doctrines of our armed forces. Because by having that good strategy and best practice so far, I think that would help us to gain at least the minimum defense posture that the country needs right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chester. Dr. De Castro or Dr.
Okay.
Rear Admiral, you want to say
See,
anything?
Real Admiral Ong muna. Let's give preference to the former Navy officer.
Sir,
Okay.
yes, po.
Siguro, we have to look at the leakages muna of the budget, of the AAP budget. One of them is a major leak is yung pension.
Mm.
Okay? That has to be addressed, and that's a political issue. Okay? But if that is solved, then that will free up a lot of money for the AFP.
How
The
much are
second-
we spending, sir, for the pension?
I don't have an idea, pero malaki yun eh.
Sige po.
Malaki kinakain nun sa kasi pumapasok yan sa GAA eh. Sa General Appropriations. It's not separate. Second is we need to look at right sizing the organization. Lumaki na yung organization, but kasi under Admin Code 1987, there's a principle of scrap and build eh. But mukhang nangyari build and build. Parang build program din. Nawala ng scrap. Okay? So there might be units or offices that are already overtaken by events or no longer relevant in the current situation. So baka kailangan bawasan talaga.
Sir, can you mention these offices? Maybe what are in your view, what are the things that maybe the offices that might not be relevant in this day and age?
Well, wag na lang offices, no. Let's look at line battalions. Okay. We need to study the fill-up rate of line battalions. Okay. Assuming na ang perfect mo is 100%, we need to look at the average fill-up rate of the, let's say, the Army battalions. So kung nagre-rate lang siya ng mga 50%, then that's already a candidate for merging battalions, di ba? If the average fill-up is 50%. Nangyayari yan sa field eh. So that's one way of merging line battalions so that we will have 100% fill-up rate. And that's already substantial. For every line battalion, it applies a certain X peso sign of budget.
So pension po and the right sizing of AFP as part of the maybe rationalizing the AFP budget. Did you want to add anything, po, sir?
Are you referring to me?
Dr. De Castro, okay, please.
Okay. Again, we have to look at also not only in terms of the budget, but the very nature of the armed service. You know, in the case of China, as something I mentioned, originally the Chinese armed forces is land-based. It's centered on the People's Liberation Army. So the huge part of the budget went to the army. And it's only now that they have focused on the Navy because their orientation is maritime. Our armed forces is still focused on the army. And Admiral Ong is so polite to emphasize this. You know, it's probably high time that we have to reorient our view.
Navy.
Which is more important, the maritime domain or counterinsurgency or land-based operation? Probably it's time that, you know, counterinsurgency should be handled by the Philippine National Police. It's a domestic, it's not a military, it's a constabulary function. So the armed forces could not be a nationwide constabulary force forever. We used to have the Philippine Constabulary. I am old enough to remember this. But since we abolished the Philippine Constabulary, that function has fallen into the hands of the armed forces, and this basically gave the army the leeway to have more of the resources. The nature of the threat we face at this point in time is maritime. The Philippines is a maritime nation that needs a respectable maritime force. So this is my point. The budget is not the problem. It's how we allocate the budget.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. So I just want to tie that up, maybe. So from Dr. Chester, we might talk about paradigms as well. Dr. De Castro talked about paradigms as well. Where do we allocate the budget? And from a more material perspective, Rear Admiral Ong focused on how exactly the AFP budget is being spent and allocated. So I think we have to go back to this whole cognitive and psychological view that was mentioned by Dr. De Castro earlier. And maybe this is something, to extend this idea of the psychological view. There's of course this lingering question, as always, about how do we balance this economic relations with China, and at the same time sort of invoke our sovereignty and invoke our victory in the arbitral tribunal. Maybe we'll answer that question, and we'll wrap up with that. So does anyone want to comment? So the question is about how do we balance our economic interests and the perceived economic benefits we get from China, and invoking our sovereignty and invoking the arbitral tribunal, which seems to be a dichotomous strategy for or at least a zero-sum strategy for this administration, that if we pursue economics, then we cannot pursue security and sovereignty. Does anyone want to comment on that? And I think this has always been the question that everyone wants to ask and have an answer to.
Well, me personally, I think it's that is sort of a very simplistic approach, no, and very rather unsophisticated one, no, which sees the world as only black and white, no. It's either this or the other, and that's your only choice. If we fall into that particular mode of thinking, then there really will be no strategy at all. No, it's only a matter of flipping a coin, maybe. No, so that kind of simplistic approach and lack of vision, no, really something that we should dispense with. No? And that's been what's happening. That's happened already in the West Philippine Sea in the past 4 years, and we've seen that it doesn't work to our advantage, because the stronger party, the party with the longer lasting capability, the more resources, will always win out in that kind of black and white, very simplistic approach.
Thank you, Dr. J. Maybe other final remarks from Dr. Chester on this issue?
We cannot divorce economics to security vis-a-vis security to economics. It goes hand in hand. That's why in national security, it's multidimensional when we talk about that. And I think more than changing our strategy, we should also tell to China that it has to change its behavior. Otherwise, if it continues becoming like a bossy big power there, then that is not acceptable. We have to tell them that there is something that they should do also for the Philippines.
Thank you.
I work in the National Security Council in the previous administration, and the policy of President Aquino then, as much as possible, we should not be dependent on China. And this is something we realized in 2012 when they embargo our export of bananas. We have to diversify. We should not be dependent on one economy. The key word here is diversification. And that's why we have the Quad. Japan is not a pushover in terms of economic. South Korea, and of course, the United States might have been affected by the pandemic, but it's still the largest economy in the world. So why should we make our economy dependent on a country that is bent on conquering, depriving us of our maritime domain? That defies logic, right? And I agree with Jay. It's simply defies logic. No, right? It's the key word here is diversification, not being dependent on one emergent economy. right? Not even in terms of vaccine, especially if the vaccine is low quality. Okay, I end my reaction here.
Thank you, Dr. De Castro. Noted. We have to diversify our economic relations, our relationship in getting the vaccines, and maybe even our alliances. Maybe we could get some comments from Ms. Liz.
I think that there's a lot of people see this as a choice between, pro-China or anti-China. And it especially seems to be shaping up that way in politics. And I think that's a false choice. I think that there are things you can do to protect your economic zone, to protect your maritime resources that aren't pro or against China. They're just defensive. They're protecting your things like anybody would. That's not a pro or against China thing. So I would encourage people to look at solutions that aren't necessarily one or the other. We can totally occupy some of these features without pissing off China. There's a way to do this. There's a way to enforce the strategy to protect the sovereignty without doing anything against China, without poking them.
Thank you for that, Ms. Liz. Final words, Rear Admiral Ong. Sir?
Just my contribution to that dichotomy between economics and security. We are the #1 source of nickel of China. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that nickel is component of steel. And guess what? Steel comes in the form of what? They come into the form of ships. So sa akin, ang tawag ko doon, niluluto tayo sariling mantika. We are exporting nickel to them, and they convert them to ships. And they're the one that's gallivanting around our EEZ. So there should be a certain level of discernment when in terms of economics and security, somewhere on the top, and that seems to be missing. And that has been going on even in previous administrations, not only this current administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Rear Admiral. Definitely, we could use our nickel production as well as for leverage. But thank you very much for today's discussion to Dr. J. Batumbakal, Dr. Chester, Dr. Rene De Castro, Rear Admiral Ong, and Ms. Liz. Maybe at this point, I'd like to turn over the floor to Professor Dindo Manhit.
Thanks, Dr. Robin. Thanks to all our speakers, Dr. Rene, Dr. J, Dr. Chester, Rear Admiral Rommel, of course, good friend Liz. Thank you for always participating and staying late. I know it's evening. I was stopping myself from contributing to the last question of Robin, because it has been my belief that the economic relationship has always been exaggerated, because historical data will show there's really no strong economic relationship, even with the pivot. We have not seen that in the form of investment. And when our government keeps on talking about robust economic relationship, more imports than exports. That means it's China who even earns from us. And of course, nickel, we have Japan, South Korea to look at as an opportunity for market. But that's not a discussion that I'd like to go into. Allow me to share our thoughts as an institute and with what is happening. As I said earlier, we continue to be proud of what our Secretary Lorenzana has started to say strongly. And we believe that we need to fight, as we have seen through previous government leaders, especially our chairman, Albert Rosario, in fighting for the West Philippine Sea. I remember when he first used the term West Philippine Sea, and I even quoted him in 2012, people in Singapore were laughing at me. Where is the West Philippine Sea? But I think we should continue to emphasize that we know where the West Philippine Sea, and that is ours. And this recent Chinese incursion in the Julian Philippe Reef has been strongly condemned, not only by the Philippine government, but by the full spectrum of Philippine society. It is clear that the sentiment of the Filipino people is for our government to be resolute in protecting our sovereign rights and territorial integrity. The persistent and deliberate swarming maneuverings of China's militia vessels in Philippine waters reveals China's expansionist ambitions and renders false their pronouncements to safeguard peace and stability in the region. They continue to instigate deceptive rhetoric and acts that undermine the precepts of peaceful resolution and stability. The Stratbase ADR Institute firmly rejects China's invasive claims in the West Philippine Sea. China does not have any jurisdiction over the maritime resources of our exclusive economic zone. The Philippines has every right to exercise its sovereignty over these waters. We have the right to patrol, protect, and harness its resources as established by international law and the 2016 arbitral ruling. We strongly condemn the disrespectful conduct of Chinese embassy officials whose recent pronouncements have offended our respected officials. This behavior is unbecoming of its official engagement as diplomatic guest of the Republic of the Philippines. We call on the administration to repivot its foreign policy stance, where paramount consideration shall be national sovereignty, territorial integrity, national interests, and where its prime duty is to serve and protect the people, as stated by the 1987 Constitution. Governments exist because of the people. Governments are elected because of the people. Government gets their legitimate mandate because of the people. We support the move to forge stronger ties with regional partners and allies in maintaining regional peace and stability through joint efforts of maritime patrol and military exercise. Again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to the keynote address of Justice Carpio. I just like to remind everyone, atin ang Pilipinas, atin ang West Philippine Sea, and good day to all. And always thank you for supporting us in our virtual roundtables. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Keep safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Stay safe.